Hello and welcome to Newsroom. We're coming to you live from Islamabad and I'm Sharmeen Ali. It seems that the final peace deal between the United States and the Taliban in Afghanistan may be on the horizon as the two sides announced on Friday that on Saturday a partial truce will begin and that a week-long partial truce will begin, paving the way for final talks on the 29th of this month in Doha, which will potentially end America's longest war of 18 years in Afghanistan. We'll be talking about how President Trump is visiting India right now on a two-day visit. And earlier today in Ahmedabad, Gujarat, he was received by a crowd of 100,000 people. Yet at this gathering, he also mentioned how the U.S. has very good relations with Pakistan and how he wishes to see that there's peace in the region of the subcontinent. So we'll be talking about that as well. And also on 23rd February, it was Plant for Pakistan Day, which is a very important thing for Pakistan to observe because only planting trees are going to help us mitigate the effects of climate change. And at the moment, Pakistan's 3% tree cover is not sufficient to fight against the effects of climate change in the country and to sustain the heat waves and the other climate change effects that the country has to face. So we'll begin our program now and we'll talk about the potential Afghanistan final peace agreement that's coming up. Let's have a look at this report.
A week-long partial truce has started across Afghanistan, which is potentially a major turning point in the country's long conflict. Afghan President Ashraf Ghani welcomed the truce, calling it an essential step towards a ceasefire and lasting peace in the country. Afghan and Taliban leaders said the reduced violence period to be observed by Afghan international and Taliban forces. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and the Taliban said the United States and the Taliban will sign an agreement on February 29 at the end of a week-long period of violence reduction in Afghanistan. The agreement could represent a chance for peace after 18 years of war and a U.S. troops presence that date back to 2001, as well as boosting U.S. President Donald Trump's hopes of pulling U.S. forces out of Afghanistan.
So we're going to be talking about this with Mr. Abdul Basit, who's an analyst and who's with us in the studios now. Thank you so much for joining us,
Thanks
sir.
for having me.
Sir, your area of speciality, international relations and this Afghanistan issue, this is a very important time that we're seeing because we've been waiting to see this final peace deal between the US and Taliban. It got delayed sometime back in September last year, and indefinitely President Trump with a tweet announced that the peace negotiation process was over, and it was a very precarious situation for a while. And then after there was an exchange of prisoners with the help of the Pakistani authorities, this peace deal seemed to sort of slowly nudge forward.
Yes, after many ups and downs, the peace process, the efforts to, get a peace deal between the U.S. and the Taliban started somewhere in 2015 when President Obama announced that they will withdraw a majority of their troops in December 2014. Right. These efforts have been underway since then. In the process, 2 Taliban chiefs were killed. One administration changed from President Obama to President Trump. Those peace processes somehow could not go forward. The current one, it suffered a setback in September, and now finally we are at a stage where after so many changing demands and shifting goalposts of the US, still Pakistan has somehow managed to keep the both parties, which is the US and the Taliban, interested in negotiations, and it has brokered a peace deal in a sense that it is preceded by reduction in violence. And if all goes well in the next 5 days, at the end of this reduction in violence period, which is 1 week, as you said, we are expecting to have a deal. Now, this deal will result or pave way for the intra-Afghan dialogue. So I think at this stage, 2 things can be said quite safely. Number one, it is in a way, it's a victory of Pakistani narrative. This is what Pakistan has been saying all along, that Taliban and other militant organizations, particularly Al-Qaeda, responsible for the 9/11 attacks, should have been dealt separately. Al-Qaeda is a transnational group. Taliban is an Afghan focus group. Their government was toppled. So mixing the two prolong the war for 18 years, number one. Number two, Pakistan said that peace negotiations or talks are the only way to bring the war to an end in Afghanistan. It took the United States of America 18 long years to realize that. That is one. So that's the victory of the Pakistani narrative. Number two is Pakistan has delivered on its promises. It was expected of Pakistan to broker the peace deal. So Pakistan used its leverage and other means to broker the deal, and now they have almost delivered it. So I think so far it is so good, and then going forward there will be a lot of challenges for the region, for Pakistan and other stakeholders.
Right. So you're talking about how the goalposts kept changing. So what are the new goalposts in these most recent peace agreements, discussions?
You see, it totally depends on how things go forward from this point onwards. I think we are in a very a volatile situation, not volatile, in a very liquidated situation. So things can go, so Afghanistan right now, it is at a crossroads. So you can go in any direction from here. You can go towards peace and you can go towards a civil war as well, depending on how things develop and how all the stakeholders involved in this, local stakeholders, which is the Afghans, regional stakeholders, China, Iran, even India, Pakistan included, and international stakeholders deal with these developments. So of the three scenarios, we can count out one. That one scenario is that is the current status quo going to prevail in Afghanistan? I think that is not going to happen. Now, the fact that we know the United States of America is going to withdraw gradually, so that...
But there'll still be the presence of a certain number of troops
Yes,
there,
yes,
like 3,000
non-fighting.
or something.
So that will be more of a presence in a sense that they will not be engaged in fighting. So if they are not engaged in fighting, it's a totally different scenario. So I think one...
And there'll still be bases remaining.
there
US
will be bases,
remaining in Afghanistan.
depends on how things pan out. So I think that one scenario we can count out is that the current status quo prevailing in Afghanistan is going to go away, and then we have two choices, or we have two scenarios. One scenario is that things will move towards peace, or we could go towards a civil war. Now, if you look at the political spectrum of Afghanistan, election results have been disputed by Dr. Abdullah. Now, he is saying that he is going to form his parallel administration in Afghanistan.
Is that dangerous for this whole process?
I mean, you can already see the Pashtun, non-Pashtun fault line is getting activated in Afghanistan, and you have Taliban who will be there to participate in the intra-Afghan peace process. So President Ghani and his team were mandated, or they were asked to form a team. So far, they haven't formed a team to the best of my knowledge, and these intra-Afghan dialogue or process has to start in Oslo, in Norway, Oslo. So if they don't form the government, form the team, and if the election results are disputed, there can be a delay, and the delay can give space to regional peace spoilers within Afghanistan to make things worse for those who want peace in Afghanistan. So I think we should be cautiously optimistic, and with very measured calculations, calculate all scenarios and prepare accordingly.
Right. So the Taliban have also pledged to talk with the Afghan government now. If they've come to an agreement with the United States, that's also a very big step in the right direction.
Yes, again, to Pakistan's credit, they convinced them to talk to the Kabul government, and this is where Pakistan's role, in a sense, ends. Now so in a way, the ball is now from the Pakistani court, is now in the Afghan court. So the onus is on Afghans. Are they serious enough? Are they ready for peace? Is Afghanistan ready for peace? Will there be a consensus, an intra-Afghan consensus on the post-US political order? The other thing which is worth mentioning here is you can have a deal, so there will be a deal. But what happens after the deal?
Exactly.
Will the deal hold? Will the deal hold? On top of that, So the deal is in theory. You sign a paper and you have a deal, right? So there will be some signing ceremony in Doha. You will have a deal, fine, fair enough. Implementation of the deal is another thing. Will the deal hold, number one? Number two, will it deliver the promises that both parties are committing to? Given the fact that after this, the US takes a similar load like Pakistan to facilitate the Afghans to talk to each other. Are they ready? They haven't formed the team yet. So how the process is going to go forward. So I think what we are looking at is the beginning of the intra-Afghan peace process. So the internationals, so there were two tracks of the peace talks. One was the Taliban-US track. We are going to see, perhaps, if all goes well, God willing, the culmination of that. And then there will be a gradual.
In your expert opinion, what would be a win-win kind of a final agreement in this situation?
In terms of the intra-Afghan peace
Yes.
process, I think the win-win will be that the Afghan side, the Kabul is able to form a team which is all representative. It's not too exhaustive, like not too many people. There are people representing all sides, all segments, and the Taliban participate. And then they are able to come up with some kind of a bare minimum agenda that how they will govern Afghanistan.
Right.
For instance, these factions under President Ashraf Ghani represent the democratic forces, and Taliban somehow do not fully subscribe to democracy. So how do they find a middle ground here? How do they work out power sharing? Will there be a transition government? There are constitutional amendments required for incorporating the Taliban into the Afghan political structure. So I think a good deal will be that at least forms a formula, finds out a formula how power sharing will take place, how constitutional amendments will happen, and whether they go towards a transition government or the current government continues and Taliban are incorporated into that. I think if these data points are covered, you can have a pragmatic power sharing agreement. Of course, there will be irritants, number one. Number two is, I think we should be patient in a sense that it is better to continue talking rather than having a premature deal, like let's not rush for it. As I told you, the US Taliban track, this track started somewhere in 2015, early 2015, and it has taken us 4 long years to come to this. So you can just imagine how long will it take the intra-Afghan peace process. So rather than rushing for a deal or having a premature deal, it will be better for these two sides to continue talking and get somewhere with these talks.
Right. We have joining us online Mr. Hassan Khan, who's an expert on Afghanistan affairs. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us.
You're welcome.
Sir, so now what do you, in your opinion, are we expecting on the 29th in Doha? Some sort of an agreement between the United States and the Taliban, and then what next?
I think this is going to be a very crucial moment in the last 4+ decades conflict of Afghanistan. For the first time, a serious, I think, negotiation has taken place where two adversaries like the US and Taliban, they sat together for quite long, for 18 months. I think this is a very strenuous job to have talks for 18 months. And I think we must appreciate the negotiating team on both sides, whether the Americans, the Taliban, they keep on talking to each other. Instead of breaking it down, they keep on inching toward the peace deal, and finally they succeeded. So I think 29 is a very crucial day, and already we know that for the last 2 days, the ceasefire, not the ceasefire, but the reduction in violence, which the nomenclature has been changed for a ceasefire. So I think that has been very properly being observed in Afghanistan, and Afghans are very much enthusiastic, whether it is the Taliban or the others. But unfortunately, simultaneously, the political, the tension between Dr. Ashraf Ghani and his rival Dr. Abdullah post-election result I think that's going to somehow dampen the situation, the euphoria, the happiness, and the expectations of Afghan. So that is the only things where we can say that we have to be careful while talking of post 29th February situation. But I'm pretty sure that for the first time, the ownership of the current peace process is not only in the hands of Afghan, but it is in the hands of a superpowers like the U.S. is struggling its hard to have a deal, a peace deal. Pakistan is trying its level best, and I think has a proven support to make this deal happen. And likewise, the Chinese, likewise the Russian. So there are more. I think the ownership is much wider compared to to such agreement in the past about Afghanistan. So that's its ownership and the eagerness of Taliban and the U.S., which we have been observing for the last a number of weeks. I think that's what giving us the confidence that hope this 29th February deal will be signed, and I think it will go ahead.
Right, and sir, the Taliban hold considerable territory in Afghanistan, and they have more power than the Afghan government in certain areas. So, how do you think this power sharing agreement might end up looking like?
Look, there is no doubt in the fact that Taliban continued fighting for almost we call it 18, 19 years. But this perception that Taliban hold grounds, they have influenced over 60 to 70% of the population. I think this is somehow exaggerated. Even today, anybody who can travel from Kabul to Kandahar, from Kabul to Mazar, and Kabul to Helmand, and Kabul to Farah, Kabul to Kunduz, etc., you can travel even in the mid of night. So it is, I think, stretching it too far if somebody say, I have traveled myself from Torkham to Mazar, and I think this is crisscrossing the whole country from east to up north. So I never come across with any difficulty that I have been stopped by anybody. There are definitely, we can't say there may be attacks, but the terrorist attack or the militant attacks, anytime that can happen. But it doesn't mean that Taliban are holding the ground. On the other side, I think the government institutions are now well established. Their military, I think, you look at the election and the September 28th election in Afghanistan. These elections were totally conducted, and the security was totally in the hands of Afghan National Army and National Police. So it is not that they are totally lame duck type or they are that much weakened and Taliban have the upper hand. No doubt Taliban have this, what we call it, they have this luxury of selection of time and target. But overall, I'm pretty sure that Taliban know their position and the Afghan government know their position. So definitely both will sit together and somehow strike a deal where there is a win-win situation.
Right. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Hassan Khan, who's an expert on Afghanistan affairs. So, Abdul Basit Saab, now coming back to you now, Afghanistan also has a wide variety of multi-ethnic and tribal groups over there. So, how will they fare into this overall process?
The formation of the team by President Ashraf Ghani has to make sure that all segments, whether they are ethnic or political, are well represented, and even demographic groups, the participation of the women, because their concerns have to be addressed in the post-US political order in Afghanistan. So they have to ensure.
Do you see women's education now being again in the mainstream in Afghanistan again, or do you think that might be a problem again?
I think these are exactly the issues which requires debate. All the progress that has been made after 9/11, democracy, education, women's right, their right to a job, their right to education, all of this, that these progress is not reversed. And what is the Taliban's position on these issues exactly? Until now, the Taliban have vaguely stated their positions on these issues. For instance, their stance is that they are all for women's rights and their education as mandated and permitted by the Islamic principles. Now, practically, what does that mean? That needs to be, thrashed out.
Right.
So I think these discussions are required. That is why I said we hope that there is a US Taliban deal, and we hope that the process starts and the discussion on all these issues is sincerely debated, and rather than rushing for a deal, I think they should talk until they come to some kind of a formula.
Right. And as a, on your final thoughts, now this has been, like you said, Pakistan's stance has now been vindicated not to take any action against the Taliban or the Haqqani network, not to take military action, but to, engage in talks, which is what has turned out to be fruitful.
Yeah, I think Pakistan, on the first count, as I said, the narrative has prevailed, and Pakistan has delivered on its promise of brokering a US Taliban deal. Now there are some unfinished agendas here, like Pakistani militant groups that operate out of Afghanistan, TTP and its linked groups, as well as the Baloch separatists, plus the Indian influence. We need to look after these two issues. Plus, then there is the question of the Afghan refugees. Peace in Afghanistan is in our best interest, so that we pave way for repatriation of these refugees. At the same time, while we are hoping for the best, we should prepare for the worst as well. For instance, if there is a civil war, we have to man our border. We should prepare for it also, but let's hope that the peace dividends will pay off.
Okay, thank you so much, Abdul Basit sir, for joining us on our program and giving your analysis on this. And on the next topic, that President Donald Trump is in India on a 2-day visit, and he's been welcomed by a crowd of 100,000 people in Ahmedabad at a rally at a sports stadium. And at that rally, he also mentioned that the US is on very, very good terms with Pakistan. Let's have a look at this report about President Trump's visit to India.
India's inhuman crackdown in Health Kashmir and the passage of anti-Muslim citizenship law will figure prominently during the US President Donald Trump's visit to India. A senior Trump administration official said Trump will also be encouraging a reduction in tensions between India and Pakistan during his talks with the Prime Minister Narendra Modi and other Indian leaders. He would nudge Modi to engage in bilateral dialogue with Pakistan to resolve their differences. The Trump administration official said Trump will urge India to maintain peace and stability along the line of control in Kashmir and refrain from actions or statements that could increase tensions in the region. US officials said issues of religious freedom will figure prominently during President's visit to India. Trump has repeatedly offered to mediate between Pakistan and India if both of them agree to, since India forcefully annexed Health Kashmir in August. Modi government has rejected these offers from Trump as well as from other world leaders, including United Nations General Secretary Antonio Guterres. Trump's visit to India comes amid growing tensions between the two countries over trade. The two countries have hit each other with retaliatory tariffs. Over the past months, they have engaged in intense negotiations to produce a mini-trade deal, but officials in both countries say it remains elusive.
So we'll have a discussion about this very important day today with Mr. Hamza Amir, who's a correspondent of India Today, who's with us in our studios. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us on our program. Now, President Trump visiting India, there are a lot of points over there that we must touch upon. But first of all, the rally that he addressed in Ahmedabad, the huge crowd turnout, and yet he mentioned a lot of things about the US and Pakistan's relations, and he got a lot of good response, but we also saw people leaving the stadium ahead of time while he was still speaking. So your feedback on this?
See, I don't think Pakistan, Pakistan's mention by the United States President in India was certainly in the line of any kind of suspicion of the Indian audience. In fact,
it was unexpected.
It was unexpected, right. At least not in a positive notion, because what he said about Pakistan was that the US and Pakistan have good relations going forward. They look forward to regional peace. So he basically indirectly stated that Pakistan's role in regional stability and peace remains pivotal.
Right.
And
here, I'd just like to quote him quickly, just to get that in perspective, that he says the United States has a very good relation with Pakistan, and he said that my administration is working in a very positive way with Pakistan. Our relationship with Pakistan is a very good one. Thanks to these efforts, we are beginning to see signs of big progress with Pakistan, and we are hopeful for reduced tensions, greater stability, and the future of harmony for all of the nations of South Asia. So that was a big statement.
It was to a great extent, but to another level, if you see that, it was a little disappointing to not hear him talk about Kashmir, not hear him talk about the human rights situation that Pakistan has been emphasizing on. Past 3 meetings of Prime Minister Imran Khan, he has requested him directly to mediate and talk to India about it. Trump has opted not to do so. See, not to forget, this is an election campaign. A ceremonial visit to India that Trump is doing. He is going to talk on the lines what Indians would want him to say, and at the same time, he would focus more on trade and regional role of India. India has been saying this, that US wants greater Indian role in the region, and in that regard, I think Trump's statement on Pakistan, even though it is very positive, yet it is a little disappointing that Pakistan's diplomacy on Kashmir and US's required role on Kashmir has not been mentioned.
Yes, and on the other hand, she did mention radical Islamist terrorism, which the crowd cheered about and all, which is the usual line that the West takes, and it kind of it encompasses the entire Muslim world, and then anyone is kind of guilty,
True.
But at the same time, before President Trump's arrival, there was still protests in India. How can the US administration just ignore such events, which are clearly there in front of everybody?
See, these protests are not new. Over 200 days to lockdown in Kashmir. The Citizenship Amendment Act being protested widely across India. And even there's a wall that was being constructed to actually not have him see the slum areas, on his way to Ahmedabad.
And the police used tear gas on protesters
Yes.
1 day before President Trump arrived.
Yes, exactly. The only problem that retains or at least refrains the world from talking about issues in India is economy. Is the kind of magnitude India possesses when it comes to economic relationship with the world. That is the only thing that takes them forward, ahead of Pakistan, because where Pakistan lacks is where India is trying to capitalize.
Sir, but how can the economy of a country like that, with this large population, move forward with this political unrest and protest literally all over the country? And the West is very apparent that there's this unrest over there. It's not caused by Pakistan, it's caused by their own internal policies. How will their investments be safe in a place like that?
The West is pretty much clear on what is ground situation in India, but at the same time, the size of economic trade between these countries and India, as a platform, is huge. Over $82 billion of economic relations between US and India would definitely have a bigger weightage when it comes to elections in US, because Trump would go back and say that I've brought business from India into US. That is being talked about. And then he's done an air defense deal as well. So he's equipping them, telling them that you need a greater role. We'll use Pakistan for Afghanistan and regional security and peace and fighting terrorism. But on the down the line, we see you acting as a major player in the region. He's said that very clearly. He said that we're loyal friends to India. And so on one side, while I see that as a positive thing, that US has spoken about Pakistan in a positive way, which would have not been very nice to the ears of Indians audience, but definitely at the same time, I would also take a sigh of relief that he's not spoken about Kashmir, because see, Kashmir issue being mediated by US, we have memories of Palestine, just recent memories, what he's done over there, and if he is a loyal friend of India, he definitely is going to be biased.
There's going to be huge bias
and definitely
over there.
that's not going to hurt.
Because the models sort of, they resemble each other. The
Yes.
Israeli model and the Kashmir model, changing the status, revocation of
What's happening in Kashmir-
exclusion of outsiders getting residence.
Exactly the same thing's been implemented in Palestine. So that is something that
And now it's
raises
sort of
serious
cemented,
concerns.
70
It has been cemented.
odd years later.
The first embassy in the occupied territory of Palestine has been of United States. So you cannot expect them to come as an unbiased, neutral role of mediator between India and Pakistan.
Right.
Unfortunately enough, this is what we've been trying to do, and I think this is about time that we realize that US is not, at least standing in position to save you or at least get you on table talks with India over Kashmir. They would not do
And
that.
at the same time, Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Prime Minister Netanyahu also have very close relations. So it seems as if they're trying to follow that model as well.
It is a trio. Everyone knows that these kind of plans have been shared. In fact, some people say that even the ideology from RSS has been taken by the Nazis and taken by the Israeli ideologies as well. How they're doing in Palestine is what is being
That's
tried out in
ironic. The
Kashmir.
Israelis should be averse to any Nazi ideology, shouldn't they?
They should be, but I think as far as occupying territory in a procedured way is concerned, keeping your powers intact, I think what they've done in Palestine is what exactly is being practiced in Kashmir.
Exactly, it appears so. You mentioned an air deal. Now, India is preparing to sign a 2.6 billion deal for 24 MH-60 Seahawk helicopters from Lockheed Martin in the US. That's a very large deal.
Yes.
And then also, India is seeking exemption from high duties that are imposed by the US on certain steel and aluminum products. And there are a lot of these kind of trade talks going on as well.
Trade deals are not being signed right now. It's only the air defense deal, because Trump has been very clear when he was leaving the Washington. He said that India has not been very nice to us when it comes to understanding the terms of trade. So there he's put a stop on that. Not only for the fact that if he would come down to a deal agreeing to Indian terms, it would affect his election, election time in US. This is an election year for him, so he's putting that on hold. He's made that really clear that any trade deal with India is going to be after the elections now.
And speaking of the elections, now you have a very interesting situation there with Senator Bernie Sanders in the lead for with the Democratic Party, who has a completely polar opposite view of most issues than President Trump. And where Kashmir is concerned, he has been very vocal about it as well.
He's not only been vocal, I think, Kashmir is something that has also now become an international electoral campaign agenda. Because when US talks on Kashmir, it definitely knows Pakistan is a stakeholder, and Pakistan is a very major stakeholder in Afghanistan as well. We're on the verge of signing a deal on the 29th of Feb between the Taliban and the US government, and Pakistan has made this very clear that Pakistan has played a very constructive role in that regard as well. So Pakistan's importance is what US realizes. They just want to keep them on the hook. Otherwise, Pakistan can use this opportunity to push US even furthermore, to tell them that, let's talk, you don't want us to talk on Kashmir, let's talk on human rights violations in Kashmir.
And it seems as if the Democratic Party has been extremely vociferous about the human rights violations in Kashmir. And were the parties, the power to shift to the Democrats, do you see a changing situation in Kashmir then?
I don't think so. Only for the fact that, see, India has been very, very clear. And even though the United Nations Secretary General said that my good offices are open if you want to talk, Trump has said that every now and then. It's only that either of the two parties, says no. India always says no, that we don't need a third party intervention. Pakistan says come in and mediate. So India, or even when India would not agree, I don't think, US or any other entity would be able to do anything when it comes to bringing both to the table.
Right, and this event that we saw today when President Trump arrived in Ahmedabad with that huge turnout of people, was that a sort of a way to win over President Trump, despite Prime Minister Modi's reputation for his heavy-handedness and the violence and the indiscriminate actions against Muslims and all? I mean, you're given that much importance in an area, it's very easy to forget what the past in that area is.
I was on my channel yesterday, and even today I was actually counting the number of strong hugs he's given to Donald Trump during his travel from the airport till Ahmedabad, and they were counting on the Indian media that it's 5 times, 6 times that he's hugged him. Modi's ideology is a different chapter when it comes to US and India relations. In fact, welcoming Trump is something that is a reaction, or at least a give back to how Howdy Modi worked out when he went there.
This was called Namaste Trump, right?
Here in India. It was Namaste Trump. So even Trump mentioned that when he came here, he went and he had huge number of audience, and now I'm here in the world's largest cricket ground with 150,000 people. So India is trying to create this image in the region which US wants it to, that down the line, if there's going to be safety, security and regional peace, the major players in economic terms is going to be India. US is going to be backing it, while Pakistan's role has been limited, as he's been very clear that it is going to be countering terror, money laundering and Afghan peace and reconciliation process.
Right. Also, the angle that the US is looking to India as a counterweight to China, that weighs very heavy over here as well.
Yes,
Otherwise, the
yes.
United States has always been a sort of a proponent of democratic values, which you're not exactly seeing at the moment in India.
See, the problem with the US is that they've always given us a cold shoulder only for the fact that we're in very good terms with China. And China comes on our rescue every now and then. That is what hurts a US. So on the other hand, they use India as a proxy to counter China.
Right.
So that is something that is going to be a point of contention. But Pakistan's role, as I said, is going to be pivotal. Pakistan needs to ensure that that role it reflects into its actions and in terms of pressure on external mediation on Kashmir.
Right. We have online joining us right now Lieutenant General Raza Mohammed, who's an analyst. Thank you, sir, for joining us.
Thank you.
President Trump's visit right now in India, you saw the rally earlier on in Ahmedabad and the statements that President Trump made about the US's good relations with Pakistan and how he wishes to see stability in the region. That was quite a loud and bold statement in front of that huge crowd in India, and you saw pin drop silence. However, do you see this translating into any sort of action in the region?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. First of all, I think as I was hearing and you were discussing that apparently there is a slight modification or change in the current US strategy, which was previously premised in South Asia over the containment of China and the control of Pakistan through India. Once he was in India and he made a mention of good relations with Pakistan, I think I'm referring to that kind of a change, which is welcome, and I think the United States may have eventually now realized that Pakistan is actually part of the problem in South Asia rather than part of the solution rather than part of the problem. And I think he also made a mention of working with Pakistan for tackling the issue of terrorism in the region. And in particular, he was referring to, I think, the tremendous efforts of Pakistan with respect to the peace efforts there in that country. At the same time, I think he made a mention of partnership with India in defense in particular, and he promised to sell them the best possible weapons. And there's a talk of $3 billion deal signing with India, and which is going to include the Apache helicopters, which is about 22 of them, which is of great concern to Pakistan, and probably some missiles and UAVs. Obviously, you know, all these weapons are going to be used essentially mainly against Pakistan and possibly against China. So Pakistan and China should express, I think, their concern on this issue in particular. Mr. Modi made a mention of U.S. and India being natural partners, and President Trump, showered some praises on him from rising from a tea seller, to the prime minister because of, and he said that if you work hard, then anybody can become the prime minister. He, I think, conveniently forgot that Mr. Modi became the prime minister of India because of his policy of divide and rule within India and his treatment of the minorities and the Hindu majoritarian sort of vote that he has been rallying against. And as he is going to arrive in Delhi probably today in the evening, so he will see, and I'm sure his staff is going to brief him about the curfew which is imposed in Delhi, and particularly in the northeastern part of Delhi, where two large groups are clashing with each other, the CAA opponents and those who support it. He actually didn't utter a word about human rights violations in Kashmir and the treatment of the minorities. Although he made an oblique reference to a number of religions coexisting in the past in India. So these are some of the issues, I think, that we will see how they materialize. And we hope that this visit brings stability to Asia and particularly to the subcontinent.
Absolutely. Thank you, General Raza Mohammed, for joining us on our program. He's a senior analyst and he touched upon various defense elements as well, which is a little bit concerning for Pakistan because all these, like you had also mentioned, it was heavily weighing on defense trade. And naturally, that defense is going to be used as a hostile elements for Pakistan and also China. How do you see that China would react to this?
Well, I think that China has always been very careful and very responsive when it comes to actions from India along the borders that it touches. It's not given India a breather, and U.S. has been eyeing at India to act against China, and also in line with that, act on Pakistan as well. They were giving them armed drones this time around. Before that, they did not have armed drones. Now they are going to have armed drones which are going to be able to carry weapons, and they'll have actually shooting ability. So that is something that should be a point of concern for Pakistan. And as I said, Pakistan can raise these issues with the United States pretty evidently only for the fact that Pakistan has a role to play in Afghan peace and reconciliation, and US is not in a position to ignore Pakistan.
Absolutely, and it would seem that it would be in the US's interest to sort out the tensions between India and Pakistan, considering that they have now very large interests in both countries.
I would say yes and no, because see, it is going to be in US's interest to intervene, but at the same time, it is not going to be in US's interest if India is going to say, no, you stay back. Because India has given the United States a very clear-cut answer on the trade deals as well, in which Donald Trump has made this very clear that they've not been very nice to us. So India is pretty rigid when it comes to its positioning. But at the same time, I believe that on the Kashmir matter, as I said, it's a sigh of relief that he's not mentioned Kashmir, because frankly speaking, I don't see the right of self-determination being practiced if a US mediation is practiced, only for the fact that the kind of words, the kind of phrases he has for India are definitely not going in line
and
with
then
Pakistan's
the question
position.
that we were mentioning earlier, the democratic values of Americans, where do those go when you're seeing what's happening in India right now, where the world's largest democracy is not behaving as such?
Well, if you remember, there was an impeachment trial against Donald Trump, and where did the democratic values of a legal justice system went in the United States when they did not even hear even a single person during his trial and gave them a clean sheet? So when it comes to politics, these democratic values, unfortunately enough, have to take a back seat at a time when you have economic interests with India and India has with US. Certainly, if India says it's a bilateral issue or it's an internal matter for India, US, I think, would take that as a yes from Indian side and not intervene.
It's surprising, keeping in mind that there's so many European countries, everybody, and US congressmen and women who've spoken up about this, human rights violations, etc. But let's see what happens in the days going ahead as the story unfolds. Thank you so much, Mr. Hamza Amir, for joining us on our program. And finally, we come to how 23rd of February was was a tree plantation day for Pakistan, Plant for Pakistan Day actually. And the reason that this is so very essential for our country is because planting trees is vital to combat climate change all over the world, and particularly for a country like Pakistan, where the United Nations says that the average number of tree cover must be above 25% of the land in a country, and in Pakistan it is only 3%, and this level is not nearly enough to combat the heat waves that we are experiencing, the floods, the extreme temperatures, the storms, and all the glacier melt and whatever we're seeing in the northern areas, the extreme cold, so and then droughts that we see also in Sindh and other parts of the country. So Pakistan is right now amongst the top countries that are most vulnerable to climate change. We're at number 7 on the list of most vulnerable countries for climate change. So it is essential for every citizen in Pakistan to take part of the tree plantation campaign that happens in Pakistan, whether it's by the government or non-government organizations. Planting one tree in our home does make a difference. More would be even better, but it's our collective responsibility as citizens to try and combat climate change and plant as many trees as possible. Thank you so much for joining us on Newsroom today. That's all the time we have for now, and we'll see you next time.